A store window glowing at midnight displays next season's collection before this season has even sold out. Somewhere behind that storefront, in a warehouse most shoppers will never see, boxes of brand new clothing sit stacked to the ceiling, tags still on, never worn, never touched, and in a surprising number of cases, they will never be sold either. They will be shredded, burned, or buried, not because they are defective, but because they exist. The easy assumption is that this is simple waste, a byproduct of carelessness or corporate greed, with no deeper logic behind it. That assumption is wrong, or at least incomplete. What looks like waste from the outside is, from inside the industry, a calculated decision. Destroying a product can be more profitable than selling it. That single, uncomfortable fact is the key to understanding one of the strangest paradoxes in modern retail. To understand why, you have to stop thinking about clothing as a physical object and start thinking about it as a bundle of information. A jacket is not just fabric and thread. It is also a price tag, a brand story, and a promise about who wears it and why. That promise is fragile. The moment a retailer discounts a jacket by 50%, it doesn't just lower a number, it rewrites the promise. It tells every future customer, implicitly, that the jacket was never worth the original price at all. This is the core mechanism, and it runs on something economists call price integrity, though a simpler way to think about it is reputation math. Luxury and premium brands don't sell products. They sell scarcity and exclusivity, and scarcity is a fiction that collapses the instant a product becomes cheap and abundant. Imagine a bakery that sells a limited edition cake for $80, then, when it doesn't sell, marks it down to $4. At the same counter the next day, the $80 price was never real. Everyone who paid it was, in effect, overpaying for a story that just fell apart in front of them. Clothing brands live in constant fear of that exact scenario playing out at scale, across thousands of stores, to millions of customers who are watching. So the industry developed a set of tools to prevent it. Discount outlets, technically owned by the same company, but branded differently, absorb some unsold stock without touching the main brand name, selling to off-price liquidators who resell to discount chains. Absorb more, though brands often restrict where and how those liquidators can resell, to keep excess stock away from their core customers. But there is always a residue, garments that can't be sold anywhere, without leaking backward into the primary market, and undercutting full-price sales. For that residue, the calculation shifts. The cost of storing unsold inventory indefinitely, combined with the risk of it eventually reappearing in a gray market at a steep discount, can outweigh the cost of simply destroying it. Destruction becomes, in the coldest possible sense, a form of quality control for the brand's image, rather than for the product itself. There is a second layer to this equation, and it involves how businesses account for what they don't sell. In many tax systems, unsold inventory is not a neutral asset, sitting quietly on a balance sheet. It is a liability that has to be reported, and its value can be written down or written off when it is deemed unsellable, meaning destroyed, damaged, or donated. In some jurisdictions with tighter rules, that creates a financial incentive. That has nothing to do with fabric or fashion, and everything to do with spreadsheets. A garment that costs relatively little to manufacture, especially in fast fashion's high-volume, low-cost production model, may generate more financial benefit for a company sitting in a landfill than sitting in a discount bin. Once the accounting is finished, this isn't a conspiracy, it's an emergent property of a system where every actor is optimizing locally for their own numbers, without anyone being responsible for the global outcome. Now, layer on top of that the sheer scale of modern production, and the paradox becomes almost inevitable. Fast fashion did not just make clothes cheaper, it fundamentally rewired the speed of the entire system. Where a traditional retailer once planned 2, maybe 4 collections a year, based on forecasts made months in advance, some fast fashion companies now push new styles to stores on a weekly basis, sometimes faster. This speed is the entire competitive advantage. It lets brands chase trends in near real time. But it also means demand forecasting becomes a guessing game, played at an extraordinary velocity. Manufacturers overproduce almost by design, because underproducing a viral trend means losing sales to a competitor who guessed right, while overproducing a flop just means some units get quietly disposed of later. The math favors making too much every single time. This is worth sitting with, because it reveals something counterintuitive about how efficiency works at an industrial scale. In a small business, overproduction is a direct, visible loss. A shopkeeper stuck with boxes they can't move. In a globalized, financialized industry, overproduction gets absorbed into a larger system, with its own release valves, discount channels, secondary markets, tax write-offs, destruction contracts, and the visible loss disappears into invisible infrastructure. The waste doesn't go away, it just moves out of sight, into a warehouse, then into an incinerator, far from the customer who has no idea it happened. To see how strange this is, it helps to rewind the clock. For most of human history, clothing was expensive, slow to make, and treated accordingly. Before industrial textile production, a single garment could represent days or weeks of skilled labor, spinning thread, weaving cloth, cutting, and hand-stitching. Clothes were repaired, resized for growing children, handed down, and eventually repurposed into rags. Before being discarded, waste, in the modern sense, was almost economically impossible. The materials and labor embedded in a garment were too valuable to throw away. The Industrial Revolution changed the equation by mechanizing textile production, and the 20th century changed it again by globalizing manufacturing to regions with cheaper labor. Each shift didn't just lower prices, it lowered the perceived value of the object itself. A shirt that once represented a meaningful chunk of a household's labor or income became, over a few generations, something closer to a disposable convenience. The relationship between the price of an item and the human effort inside it stretched further and further apart, until the two became almost disconnected. It became entirely possible, for the first time in history, to manufacture more of something than the planet's population could reasonably want or need, and to do it profitably. That disconnection is what makes the destruction of unsold clothing feel so jarring when people finally see it. It violates an old, almost instinctive sense that objects requiring human labor deserve to be used. But the modern system was never built around that instinct. It was built around velocity, brand value, and financial optimization. Three forces that don't inherently care whether a coat gets worn or whether it gets shredded. As long as the numbers work out favorably either way, there are signs the system is being forced to adjust. Public backlash after specific companies were caught burning unsold luxury stock pushed some brands to publicly commit to ending the practice. Regulators in parts of Europe have begun drafting or passing rules that restrict or ban the destruction of unsold textiles outright, effectively trying to close the loophole that made disposal financially rational in the first place. Resale platforms and secondhand markets have grown large enough to become a legitimate outlet for excess inventory, rather than an embarrassment to be hidden from. These are real shifts, but they are responses to a system's incentives, not proof that the underlying incentives have disappeared. As long as overproduction is cheaper than precision, and as long as brand image is worth more than a single garment's sale price, some version of this paradox will keep finding new outlets to escape through. What this story ultimately reveals is something broader than fashion. It's a pattern that shows up whenever humans build systems optimized for one variable, speed, price, or brand perception, without building in a mechanism that accounts for everything the system produces as a side effect. Nature doesn't generate true waste in this sense. In an ecosystem, one organism's discarded material almost always becomes another's resource. A fallen leaf feeds soil, a carcass feeds scavengers. Nothing sits inert and unclaimed for long. Human industrial systems, especially ones built for speed and image rather than circularity, don't have that built-in feedback loop. They can generate genuine dead ends, products manufactured, transported, and destroyed, without ever serving the purpose they were made for. The unsold jacket in the warehouse isn't evidence of a single villain making a single bad decision. It's the visible output of thousands of small, locally rational choices about pricing, about forecasting, about brand protection, about tax treatment, stacking together into something that looks irrational from the outside, and yet makes perfect sense from within the system that produced it. Understanding that distinction doesn't excuse the outcome, but it does explain why the problem has proven so difficult to simply legislate or shame away, and why solving it will likely require redesigning the incentives themselves, not just pointing out that the result looks wasteful. The clothes were never the problem. The system that decided they were worth more destroyed than discounted is.